you played all those instruments at the same time.
Yeah. All right, we're back again.
Well, hello.
Final session. Lots to go through. Lots of action-packed stuff to talk about. Play.
Like explosions.
My favorite topic.
Play too.
Before we get into play, though, I had two things from last week. So since we've been talking a lot about the feminine, I've been reading this book called At My Father's Wedding, Men Coming to Terms with Their Fathers and Themselves. So he talks a lot about finding your masculinity. Men, first off need to find their own masculinity, but then he talks about femininity too. So he takes men out into these wood gatherings and conferences to they talk about their fathers and talk about their issues. So I guess he must have wrote this as sort of like a generic letter. So when you get back and you give it to your wife. So it's called Letter to a Partner. It says, "Dear woman, this weekend I touched the feminine. I let that part of me that slips into my dreams in a variety of forms and with many faces actually become real inside me. I, who live so much of the time in my head and who call upon the masculine to move mountains, build bridges and pay bills, have longed for this interior female that all men possess but usually abandon and project onto women. Perhaps the reason we're together is because you're so feminine so much of the time. You, with your oceanic waves of feeling and spontaneity and sensuality, encourage me on good days, confuse me on bad ones. Your sexuality, like your soul, does not punch in and punch out on company time cards or live by clocks and calendars, but rather exists in seasons and cycles and rhythms that I came to know deeply this weekend for a little while, as I have on a few other occasions. So you see, one of the reasons I've sometimes recoiled from your touch and sunk into sadness is that I've been afraid I would lose the feminine I'd found for a brief moment. I feared that you'd carry the function for me. I was scared that there wouldn't be enough room in this 3-bedroom, 2-bath house for my feminine side and yours. My interior feminine inhabits my home so rarely that I was afraid she'd disappear in your presence, in the same way as your masculine side sometimes moves out of my way. Another reason I often can't look at you lovingly as I feel is that I grew up with a devouring mother who was very feminine and ate my masculine energy on days Dad provided none. She made no room in our house for my feminine side, and my father, who let my mother carry that energy for him, certainly did not encourage me to develop my femininity. So you see, it's not that I don't love you, and it's not that I'll always feel this afraid, but you must understand that my healing depends so much on my ability to hold on to my feminine side and still be in your presence. I'm learning how to do just that, and I must go slowly. I wrote this letter because I know about my fear of losing my femininity, which I only just found. I wanted you to know that I'm determined to find more of her over the coming years, and I wanted you to know that I hope this process will bring me closer to you. P.S. I know you're not my mother." So I just thought that was interesting with all we've been talking about with feminine. It's a pretty interesting book. The other little tidbit that I thought of, last week we were talking about how play can help you see the redemption and the abandoned things. So I was thinking about that one verse. It says, the cornerstone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And I think it's really interesting, whereas we would try to hide the worst part, where God's like, no, actually I'm going to take the centerpiece. I'm actually going to take the thing that you rejected and make it the centerpiece. That's how much confidence he has in his creativity. He's like, I'm a genius. I'm going to make the very thing you hate the centerpiece of my artwork. So I just thought that was interesting. So tonight we're talking about play, my favorite thing. So as I read the books, for you, some of you got here, Ish. For you guys on the MP3, read the book by Peter Reynolds, Ish, and another one called Dot. I highly recommend going to buy them. But it's just the whole idea of being creative and being playful and not worrying about the mistakes. It's like people have forgotten that in those videos we're talking about too. But one thing I discovered over the last year is, if you read Genesis, it says, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and without void. So even God started with a lump of clay. Even he started with a piece of something to form and mold into something. So starting off with clay or, messiness is not a bad thing. It's the process. It's part of the enjoyment. And then you make the finished piece. You never start off a paper with, nobody ever writes a complete final draft. and turns it into the teacher. You start off with a rough draft. Like, there's always going to be rough edges. So, and I think we should start seeing that. Like, part of it is we live in the fallenness of the world, so you're always going to make mistakes. Like, you might as well just settle it. Like, you're going to make artwork that has, blemishes. So last week we talked about, play, and if play can be, if we can be convinced that play is silly and ridiculous, we won't do it. And so since play and faith I see as parallel, then we won't use faith, and we won't call on God in times of need, either for need or for like, hey, I got all these dreams I want to complete. Oh yeah, faith, that's silly, God's never going to do it. Like, faith doesn't work. So I think if we can be convinced that this sort of attribute is worthless, then we'll never use it. Term we use a lot in our culture, have childlike faith. I don't think that's any coincidence. Right. Pretending and make-believe. I like what he's in Whole New Mind, where he's talking about, the idea of play is that you can become anything. And I remember he was saying earlier in the empathy chapter, he's like, you're going to see how play and empathy relate. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, when you have to be able to play to be empathetic, because play is what allows you to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Like, I'm going to pretend to be this guy. And I think that's such a powerful tool, like I was saying last week. Now, especially think about the relationships you're in. Like, it may not be the answer, but you could at least say, okay, me and this person are having an argument. Why don't I literally pretend to be this person and try to think like her or him, and like say what I think they might say. Like, you might get an insight into how they're feeling. And we do this in my drama group all the time. Like, we take a person's story, we play it out for them, and it never ceases to amaze me. They always get something. Maybe it doesn't have like this grand revelation, like, oh, my father left me, but they always get something like, oh, when you were doing this thing over in the corner, you were jumping up and down, it just triggered some other memory, and it made me remember the time such and such. Like, I think it's amazing how you're always going to get something out of playfulness. So the problem is, we've been taught to avoid play, and something okay, so here on Child's Play and Adults Work, sorry if you can't see.
Short term, can you see now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the problem is somewhere along teenage age, you start to lose that childlike sensibility. So tonight what we're going to talk about is the idea, like he said, that term neoteny, the ability to retain your childlike abilities even when you grow up. That's really what we're talking about. So here we have child, adult. I think the first thing I'll bring up is, for whatever reason, we forget that children are also made in the image of God. It's just something that kind of goes over our head. We're like, yeah, they're children, blah, 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 because we're so focused on our own lives. But I ask myself, why did God create babies? Like, why didn't he just he started Adam, why didn't he just keep making grown men? There's some reason he wanted you to see this and this. So you can't just disregard the childlikeness. When the disciples were with Jesus and the children ran up and they tried to rebuke him, he's like, what was your problem? He's like, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. So I think the thing we need to do here is figure out how to become what you might call man-child. There's this rapper who, one of his nicknames is man-child. And I just pondered what that meant, and I figured like, oh, I guess you're supposed to somehow be both a man and a child simultaneously. Like, you're supposed to be a grown person with responsibility and confidence, but at the same time, you're never supposed to lose that childlike faith and sensibility. So the problem with adults, what happens is, as those videos said and that song we listened to, once you become adult, you stop asking for help and you stop asking questions. Because you know everything, you don't need anybody's help. I think there is truth to that. I think you do come to a point where you have confidence and you know what you're able to do, but you're always looking back. Like, there's a cycle. You have confidence, but you're always looking back at that vulnerability because you're like, oh, this is where I came from. Like, I didn't do this on my own. I always had help, but I am doing it on my own now. And I think it's the idea of, like, when you learn to tie your shoes, somebody comes over, he's like, I tied my shoes all by myself. It's like, yeah, you're proud that you did it on your own, and mommy helped me. There's a sense that you had help, but now I'm kind of doing it on my own. So I think we have to sort of balance those two mentalities. How do we stay confident and sure of what we're doing, whether it be life or art, And we have to also always be open, because you can't be creative if you're not open. Children, they always are asking questions by necessity because they don't know anything. You know, they're just like, what is that? Ooh, what is that? What is that? So they're always filling their head with new information, whereas grown-ups, they're just like, yeah, I got it. Yeah, don't try to teach me anything. Yeah, I'm cool. No, I don't need help. I got it. Thanks. My mom likes to read this little poem that she found on the internet. It's like, age 5. Wow, my mom knows everything. Age 15. Yeah, my mom, she may know some stuff, but she's not as cool as she thinks she is. Age 20 to 30. Yeah, my mom doesn't know anything. She needs to stay out of my life. Age 40, like, wow, maybe I should talk it over with mom. So just kind of this progression of where you realize, you know, from child to adult, you always need your mom.
There's another good comic where it has a picture of a kid who says, why can't I be like everyone else? And there's a picture of an adult in a black suit going, why can't I be different? So you hear that a lot. Those are good. And also, C.S. Lewis has a really good quote where he says, when I became an adult, I put away childish things, such as the fear of being childish.
Good. Yeah, Daniel told me that quote. I didn't know it existed, so I printed it out.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, it says.
I'll read you the whole quote. It says, critics who treat adult as a term of approval instead of merely as a descriptive term cannot be adult themselves. To be concerned about being grown up, to admire the grown up because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish, these things are the marks of childhood and adolescence. And in childhood and adolescence, they are, in moderation, healthy symptoms. Young things ought to want to grow, but to carry on into middle life or even into early manhood, this concern about being adult is a mark of really arrested development. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I'm 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So I think one of the things we have to see is that you have to redefine the term play. Like the guy was saying in the video, it's not about, this is what I think people see when they see play. You know, they think we're going to put on beach shirts and pinwheel hats and, ooh, let's play in the sandbox. It's like, no, play is the idea of creativity or having fun, taking enjoyment in what you're doing, or having a childlike sensibility to the way you approach life. So, I mean, just as ridiculous as this kid looks in his father's suit, obviously we would look ridiculous in wearing children's clothes. But me and my friend Cameron had this conversation, and we came to a really good distinction between childish, like the book Ish, and childlike. Like childish is to behave in an immature manner, but childlike is to retain the qualities of a child where you're still open to taking in information, you're still, you know, willing to ask questions, be curious, wonder about mystery. I mean, I think for artists this is hugely important because if you get to a point where you stop becoming curious and mysterious and, you know, asking like what's out there, like how are you going to ever put anything new out? Because you're always just going to pump out what you've always put in.
So I love to play. You know, yeah. I've even made my definition for I'm not old as long as I can still do a standing backflip. Like that's my definition of old, and I still like being childish about things. You know, I was in England and took my friends' kids to a playground, and this one kid was like, Evan, we should race. And I was like, yeah, there's a track here. Tell you what, you ride your bicycle and you get halfway around the track, and I'm gonna catch you and I'm gonna beat you. You know, and he's like, no, you're not. And so ran around, and I was like, you know, do you think I can jump off this? Do you think I can, you know, do this? And like, I was just acting like a complete, you know, a child. And this older African couple were sitting there, and they said, where are you from? And I said, and I didn't know where they were from at that point. And I was like, oh, I'm from America. Did you recognize my accent? You know? Mm-hmm. They're like, no, we didn't hear you talk, but you don't act like an English adult. You know, they're all so serious.
Yeah.
And I was like, life's too short to be serious all the time, man.
Yeah.
I want to play.
Yeah. When you made me think of this quote, a couple of these quotes. I saw this on a bumper sticker. It said, growing old is mandatory. Growing up is optional.
That's what I'm talking about.
Another quote I read recently says, we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean,
Help us.
yeah, I mean, I think there's something like even the idea of just like being active and running. Like adults, they go, you go from a child playing recess. Another part in that video, which I didn't show, the guy said he was taking his kid around to all these schools, and they're like, every day we're going to have math, reading, science, just nonstop. He's like, what about play? He's like, we're not going to have 1 minute of play. He's like, the kid is 5 years old.
Yeah, right.
So it's like kids go from all of this energy and excitement to sit in the chair, like sit in his office. And I'm sure, like in the book Play, which I brought in, his thing is, by the end of the book, he's like, I feel like one of the most important things that we don't do anymore is just physically move. He's like, as human beings, there was a study in there. He took 5 women who were depressed. They would just sit around their house, and he made them. He's like, no, we're going to get up and walk. We're just going to walk today. And he's, they didn't like become cured overnight, but the idea of just getting adrenaline going and chemicals and endorphins, infused their mind and brain with, substances that made them more happy.
Have you heard of the unschooling programs that they got? Well, essentially what it is, in North, it's more in the North, they've got a few of them, where they take kids and essentially put them in a giant room that have, there's a little bit of supervision, but mostly the kids are just allowed to do whatever they do. Got violins, math textbooks, video games, and stuff like that. Everything you could possibly imagine for a child to occupy themselves with. Now, yes, all of them at first run to the video game council and sit down. But after like a week of that, they then get up and start playing around with the violin or go over to the math textbooks and start reading them. And the majority of kids, they've got like 90 percentile of kids that go to these schools go to Ivy Leagues, like Princeton, Harvard, Yale. At worst, a kid will play the video games for a month, but then freely go and engage in the math, the reading, because they take a free interest in it, simply to prove the point of the value of play into it. This gives the kids the agency to want to learn. And it turns out when people want to do something, it's shocking, they get their own mastery of the subjects. Very bad. It's called unschooling.
Huh. Yeah, speaking of video games, I was surprised at how much the chapter on Play and Holding the Mind was all about video games. Like he was really promoting video games to the point where people would have been like, "Are you serious?" Mm-hmm. But I think it was interesting. A lot of things he was saying. On the flip side, on the flip side and on the positive side, 2 examples in Play. The guy talks about the downside of video games, like how these people in Korea, like they'll just sit in front of the computer screen for like 15 hours straight, and they'll die from deep vein thrombosis. I can't remember what they die from. But just sitting in front of the computer nonstop, they just died. Right. But he was saying part of that was from lack of play, because in that country, the government forces you to do jobs that you don't want. Like, this is what you will do. So this is their only outlet. So this is, and it goes back to that, like that one chart I was saying, people, there's deprived of stuff all week, they're going to go crazy on the weekend. So it's just the same there. They're going to go crazy playing video. If you don't let their natural passions come out, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to sit in front of a video game screen all day and all night trying to fulfill that satisfaction.
But it also said those people sound like they had OCD as well. Like you said, I can't just blame the video game. It sounds like those people were also, in the Stewart book, very obsessive compulsive, where if they stop for 1 minute, somebody's going to get ahead in World of Warcraft, and then they'll have a level 99 wizard, and they won't, so they have to sit there, and they can't stop until they die.
Yeah, that too. So on the bottom, this is what happens. We start off life as children, and basically our whole existence is to play, because we're supported by our parents. We're dependent upon them. So this is our cycle. So then as we move through life, this is where the problems start to happen. So what happens is parents start to phase out play, and they start to introduce responsibility to the point where you get over here and all it is responsibility. Because you're got to be on your own one day, so I got to teach you how to do things for yourself, which is true. But the problem is that once you... or what I should say is, this is what should happen. You should say, okay, Johnny, you're getting older now. You're going to have to start learning a second kind of play, which is called responsibility, because mom and dad can't do these things for you anymore. And the upside is you now have control over your play. Because before, when you were over here, I want to go to Disneyland. Well, you got to wait till mommy and daddy say you go to Disneyland. And you got to wait till they pay for the tickets. But now you can get your own money and you can go to Disneyland whenever you want. Or wherever, buy a car. But you're going to have to learn how to balance this and this, This new kind of play requires you to get up and do things and make money so you can support this play. I think that's the way stuff needs to be taught to children rather than just yanking play out and saying, now be responsible. It's like, first off, a child can't handle that. Secondly, as we're going to see, you're not supposed to lose play. You're just supposed to change the way play happens. So, because you could be an adult and still be childish, as we talk about, like sort of 60s, 70s hippie movement. If it feels good, do it. That's a childish attitude. Just do whatever you want when you feel like it. But then this is also not a good attitude. All work and no play. As you know, the famous quote, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So that's that, the cycle of play and responsibility. So similarly, we're going to talk about, let me just insert this a little bit. So I think this is interesting, this chart down here. I started thinking about how children and grandparents are kind of very similar. It's like, you have that old joke. It's like, when you're a little baby, you're naked, you poop on yourself, somebody takes care of you. When you get older, you're naked, you poop on yourself, So there's this kind of interesting connection between children, babies, and, grandchildren. Because in one sense, the child is dependent on the adult parent, and sometimes the grandparent becomes dependent on their own child. And there's that kind of connection between the grandchild and the grandparent. The grandparent comes over and is like, here's some money. And the parents are like, don't give him that. Grandparent doesn't care because they don't have to take care of it. It's like, that's your child. You got to take care of them. So the sort of lack of dependency allows the grandparent to feel free. The child feels free. I think it's interesting for the adult in this equation. I think there's a lot of bitterness and cynicism. We talked about Fight Club before, but there's this one scene in Fight Club where Brad Pitt's character is like, I graduated from school. I called my dad. I said, what should I do? He said, I don't know, get a job. So I get a job, work it, call my dad back. He's like, what should I do next? I don't know, get married. So I get married. I'm married for a couple of years. I call my dad. What should I do now? I don't know, have kids. All right, so I have kids. I call my dad. Now what, Dad? It's like, heck if I know. So it's just this kind of mentality that people take this path of life that they don't even know why, but they just sort of assume it. And so I think what happens when people kind of just take that path, they end up feeling really bitter towards their children because maybe they didn't want to have children right away, but they felt the pressure from their parents and felt this sort of, societal train of thought, I'm supposed to take this. So now their kids, I think three things happen. They're bitter because they have kids who get to play all the time. So they're just looking at the kid playing, like, I should be doing that. How come he's getting to have fun? Then they get bitter because, it's happening on my dime. Like, I'm paying for this fun. And then thirdly, I'm not getting to play anymore. So I think, sort of what we talked about earlier with the whole American dream mentality, really making choices for what you want in life, not just following a path. But maybe I don't want kids right away. Maybe I don't want to get a house right away. Maybe because you end up blaming stuff on the children, and I think children a lot of times become the objects of bitterness. It's like the kid's not his fault. He didn't ask to be born. He just came out. Don't get mad at the kid. Get mad at yourself because you made the choice when to have kids. So that's just connecting a lot of stuff we've been talking about. I read a couple places, and it seems like no one has confirmed the statistical data, but I still like the numbers. I will say it's true. They said, kids laugh hundreds of times a day versus adults only laugh 15. And it's just and they say the reason is because adults need a reason to laugh. It's something funny, ha 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 ha, where kids just laugh spontaneously. So maintaining that childlikeness. Last time we talked about, the idea of the line in the circle and how sometimes you have to put serious stuff first and sometimes you have to put playful stuff first. It's not always an order. It's sometimes shifting it around. And when I was thinking about that, I just said out loud, I was like, yeah, there's a time for everything. It made me think about that Ecclesiastes verse. It's like, yeah, there's a time for everything. There's a time to be serious, and there's a time to play. Like everything has its proper place. It's just determining when does that take place.
Properly.
Exactly.
Properly.
So we'll see more in a second, but we've been talking about the male, female, how we need to balance that out in us all. I think that yin-yang thing can take the same idea with the child and adult. Like, you have to balance your childlikeness and your adult. I mean, just from a practical standpoint, like, I went to this show my friends invited me to, and this guy was a musician playing the guitar, and it sounded like, I don't know if he was a children's songwriter, but like all his songs were very like ding 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 ding, like very, like I felt like I was watching Barney, and like the whole time I was just like cringing. I was like, why did you, like, am I supposed to be enjoying this? And everybody else was kind of clapping, but there was just this adult side of me that was like, I want to hear like music for me, music that makes me go, yeah, I like this is good. Like, there was an adult side of me that needed to be satisfied. In other arenas, there's a childlike part. Like, if I go to work, I still want to be satisfied in the sense of curiosity, mystery, wonder, asking questions. So it's just learning when and where to balance those things and not thinking about childlikeness, as I said, this pinwheel hat and beach clothes and sitting in the sandbox and acting silly. It's more about the characteristics of what a child is like.
Makes me think about Michael Clem.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just a goofball. He writes silly songs, he has fun with them. He could write some serious stuff, but yeah, it's fun doing what he does.
Yeah, there's like people out there like, Weird Al Yankovic. He's never going to change. I mean, but he's making money at what he's doing. Like, he's supporting himself.
Yeah.
People would see him as like, oh, are you ever going to get serious? He's like, no. It's like, I'm not a serious person. And I like what the guy said, like for me, teaching this class is fun. This is play for me. But we're talking about serious topics. We're getting serious things done. But I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't fun.
We're having some serious fun.
Exactly.
Fun seriousness is going down. Seriously.
Some serious fun.
Fun
right now.
Fun, serious, funtivity.
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 So, like I said, a lot of people have cynicism, bitterness, and we're going to, similar to that play, the play chart down here, we're going to talk a little bit about commitment and love. They have the same balance. So I think this is one thing that needs to be tackled too, this idea of commitment and sacrifice, because people try to isolate those topics. And I'll give you the precursor to what I think that is. I think one, the flesh is weak. Spirit is willing, flesh is weak. So God saw human race and he's like, well, clearly these people often have intentions on doing things, but they don't always follow through because after the fall, the flesh does not always do what you want it to do. So there had to be some emphasis on the idea of you need to commit even when you don't feel like it, because if you only do stuff when you feel like it, you're not going to always do it. Second, I think people have taken something that's meant to be like a deterrent to bad behavior and they turned it into a lifestyle. So for instance, people say stuff like, you may not feel like going to work, but you got to do it anyway. That eventually becomes things that you don't like to do is the right thing to do. Like the mindset just goes all the way to the wrong spectrum. It's like, yeah, you wake up sometimes, you're like, I don't feel like going to work. But if you have commitment, you have to just say, well, I committed to this. I'm going to go to work even when I don't feel like it. But then people they wake up, like people start asking you to do things. You're like, oh, I don't feel like doing this. This must be the right thing to do then, because doing things against our nature is what's right.
Dude, people are that way with God and like what God wants them to do.
Yeah.
They just automatically assume, well, I don't want to go move to this place and do this job and do this, so it must be God He's wanting to grow me. You got to break it down before you can build it up. Like, yeah, no.
It's constant.
Sometimes, yes, but not as a rule. We take it, we make that into the rule.
It's a manual console.
Yeah.
Daniel's going to have a whole class on Kant. Just insert that here.
Destroying him. Erasing him from mankind.
It's funny. It makes me think of something Joseph Prince said. He said some people take that way when they're like, when it comes to marriage. It's like, oh, if my wife, the woman I want to marry is not attractive. He's like, if you ever see the person you're going to marry, you think, sacrifice. He's like, this is not the right mentality. He's like, God wants you to have someone who you're attracted to. Like, God works through natural order and natural inclinations for people. I just thought it was hilarious. He said, if you ever look at the woman you're supposed to marry and you say to yourself, sacrifice.
That's why me and you will never be together, Bernard.
Yes! Doors of opportunity. No. But it also becomes a pride thing, where, you wake up in the morning and you say, hey, I'm doing something that I don't want to do. I am therefore better than the people who are doing something.
Well, it's the martyr.
Yeah, it's the martyr.
They get this martyr mentality.
And also in the workplace, you see people playing and you go, oh, I'm superior to that person. And then when you're laughing at work and you look at people not laughing, you say, oh, they're better than me. Because as a society, we've said the responsibility adult way is the higher on the hierarchy rather than integrating them all together. It's quite sad. And Walker Percy once said that the human is the science of mystery. I wanted to throw that in there. Walker Percy said the human is the science of mystery.
I like it.
That was pretty hot. Walker Percy is pretty awesome.
I like it. So I found this interesting trend. So as people go from dating into marriage, and from college into the real world, there's this cynicism that you see. People's like, oh wow, yes, the reality, yes, exactly.
Yeah, TV show.
So as people go from dating to marriage, like people are happy for you, like, oh wow, you're newlyweds, congratulations. Just wait a few years, you'll see marriage sucks. Or like when you're in college, like, oh, congratulations on your degree. Just wait till you get in the real world, you're not gonna be able to find a job. There's so much cynicism and bitterness.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from that whole Fight Club mentality that, like, those people chose the wrong thing. Right. So rather than be happy for you, misery loves company. And I think what happens to them is they end up only being able to operate on half of this. Because now it's like, oh, I did all these things that I thought I was supposed to do. Now I have to pay for all this stuff. I can't just do it because I like it. I have to commit to my job because now I owe money and have to pay for all these things. So now when they see everybody else, they expect everybody else to look like them. And like, oh, life is about commitment, responsibility, sacrifice. You can't just do what you want. You gotta do it even when it's hard. It's like, yeah, that's true, but that's not my lifestyle.
Well, people don't know how to have fun for free.
Yeah.
And so you get locked in that. And like when Missy and I, we paid off $24,000 in debt in the first 2 years we were married on just my salary. Wow. That wasn't a big salary, and basically half my salary all year went to paying off debt, and it was crazy. But we learned how to have fun for free. There were a lot of friends that we couldn't hang out with them because everything they did, like in one night, spent more than our monthly going out budget. And we're like, we can't do that. We can go do this. You can go do this with us for free. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's like, so I can see the parallel between that diagram down here about play and responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like you somehow have to phase out love and phase in commitment. So marriage all of a sudden becomes about commitment. It's all about commitment. It's like, if I wanted to do something that's about commitment, I should get another job or pay taxes. Like if I need more commitments, I'll do some stuff that doesn't require me to attach my life to somebody else. So you can't just phase out love and phase in. You have to, like, the two are like polar ends pulling each other together. Because if you just have love and you only do things when you have love, you're not going to always do the right thing. Like, I don't feel like loving you today because you're getting on my nerves. You will easily just divorce your wife.
Or I love this other person right now.
Yeah, exactly. So commitment helps to balance that out. But if you're only committed, then it goes back to those other lessons where we just talked about obligation. Like, I'm committed to my wife. Why? Just because I'm supposed to be. That's the right thing to do. So your wife or your kids or whatever have now become a duty. It's like last week we were talking about efficiency, and I was saying, abundance versus efficiency. If you think about the idea of efficiency, no one is efficient for efficient's sake. Like, you're always efficient so you can have something else. Like, I go to the gas station, I want to spend less money on the gas so I can have more money left over to buy CDs. Like, I'm never just efficient for the sake of efficient. There's always something greater and later that happens. So it's the same thing with commitment. There's no such thing as commitment just for the sake of it. You're committing because you're in love. But when you're in love, you also have to commit.
Yep.
So the two are, tied into one another. So people who, kind of follow this, once you get into marriage, it's all sucky. Or once you get into the real world, it's all sucky. Partially it's because they only have their life is obligation. So that's why it's bitter for them. They see you like, yeah, watch out, kids. You don't want to get married because then life just becomes a ball and chain. Your wife is just a ball and chain. So then people end up settling for less because rather than actually having a marriage that's like rich and a family life that's rich, it's like all we're going to get is working and coming home and being tired. Because all this stuff connects. It's like if you buy all this stuff, then you got to spend more time at work. Then you're at work all the time, so you're definitely not at home with the people in your family. So then those relationships break up, and then you get home, you don't have that relationship, so everything just gets thrown out of whack.
I have a question. This doesn't really apply to the dating and marriage thing, and more the college and real world. So I have a lot of friends right now who are totally unemployed and do not want to be. And I guess my question is what are the economics of that? Because so one of my friends that I'm particularly close with who's unemployed is sort of at the point where it's like, okay, I've been looking for a year for a real job. I mean, he has a master's. And, this is just not happening what I would love to do, what he enjoys. So I'm going to have to get a crap job just to, survive in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, then the question to me is, I guess you can still bring play into, anything that you're doing in a way.
Yeah.
But he still will have to, his boss probably is not going to be very open-minded in a crap job, and will be like, why are you laughing? In most low-paying jobs. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, who don't have a master's and who maybe didn't get to go to college. How can they bring these things in? I often feel very privileged because I got to choose to go work for a nonprofit and and do what I love. I feel very privileged to be in that place. I just wonder for people who.
A few things. I would think one is in the period that you're in. I would say you may not get it in that job, but you definitely need to have it somewhere else so that you're not going crazy. And I think as much as humanly possible. I know some bosses are just not. They're just gonna be like, whatever. This is crazy. I don't know. I had a friend who we were in another class, and she was saying she had this really boring job of insurance numbers of people or something. And then she said she realized, wow, these aren't just numbers. These are people. And then she said, you know what? I love praying for people. Why don't, as I type in these numbers, I just pray for each one of these people's in their health, since they're on health insurance. So I think even if it's not something outwardly where the boss is going to see it, finding something internal where you can make it a game for yourself, and then, the final thing is just, something I've been thinking about, we've been talking about the idea of co-creation with God, just being like, okay, God, show me the creativity in this job that I'm not seeing. We always forget to go to the obvious and say, okay, God, you help me, because we want to figure it out rather than just be like, I'm bored, God. Give me some insight on what I can do. It may not be the most exhilarating thing, but while you're sort of in that period, ask. What's that one famous guy? He washed dishes. He's some guy who's really famous. All he did was wash dishes all day long, but he prayed to God continually.
Oh yeah, Brother Lawrence. Yeah. So he washed dishes. He made food. His entire life was prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He is simplicity.
So
it's really encouraging. I didn't even want to share that.
Yeah, that's. I think for me, just even recently, realizing how enriching and important knowing God is.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important, because wherever you go, if you're able to commune with Him, then it's oh, this is exciting because it's with Him. But if you have this picture that God is boring, then you're I hate this job and God is boring. I want to shoot myself.
Yeah. Well, and you don't have to, just because you are at a boring job, just because it's not what you dreamed of, it doesn't mean that, oh, well, I took a boring job that I don't like, and maybe there's just no way I can have fun at this thing. I shovel poop all day, sort of thing. There's nothing fun about this. It doesn't mean, I think part of play is continuing to use your imagination about what's next, and pursuing your dream, and not saying, well, I need to give it up forever now and grow up and be an adult because my dream didn't work out right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, like we were saying last week, like the true creative genius will find the value anywhere. Like God will never come into a situation and be like, great, I guess there's nothing to do here. I guess he saw humanity. Like, think about that picture. Like, oh, yeah, you guys messed it up. Well, guess what? I'm going to take that and make that the centerpiece. So I think just having that creative mentality where it's like, it's not the job, it's like what I do to the job.
The first job I got out of college was working for a chemical plant. I sat at a desk, I bought things, I spent money, I bought pipe. Everything that wasn't a chemical in the plant, that's what I bought, And there were elements that were really fun about that job, And I found out what it was, learned how to do all that stuff even better, and then doubled the productivity of the job because I kept finding more and more fun stuff to do. And say, hey, can I do this? Can I do this project? Can I have this? And then, finally got to the point where 2.5 years later, we're debt-free. I don't need to make that much money anymore. And I'm at the point where I've gotten as much fun as I could out of the job. And so I said, hey, Missy, I need to quit and take a 50% pay cut, lose all my benefits, and go work construction again for $10 an hour. And she's like, okay, go for it. But, there was a season of having to work, doing the job, and man, getting up every day, I would just grin on the way to the construction site. I love it, but I couldn't do it right away.
What is it? Matthew 7:7 says, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open for you. And it's simple as that.
Yeah.
That's a story of persistence too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Asking, then moving,
and seeking,
then finding it, and then knocking.
That's right.
And
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think.
I thought about that till right now.
Must be
That's brand new.
But yeah, because like last year I had to take a job with the Census Bureau, which is obviously not my personality. I had to go knock on doors. Hi, I'm with the U.S. Census Bureau. You didn't fill out the form you were supposed to fill out, so now I got to ask you questions like a robot. Are you a man? I know you said your name is John. It was just like, but I didn't have any money, and I didn't want to do it. Yeah. But I saw it as this stepping stone. I was like, okay, I like being alive and doing art. Over there is alive and art. Right here is a pit. All right. Stepping stone. All right, but no way was I going to be like, now I'm here forever with this. Just blow my head off now, because I would never take a job with the Census Bureau forever. But I had to do it for the moment. So sometimes there's stuff you have to do that you don't want to do, and nobody would ever know. Every time I told people the Census Bureau, they gave me this like crazy contorted face, like, Bernard, what Census Bureau? What? They couldn't even see it. I was like, yeah, I know. So the next thing we're talking about is this idea of sacrifice, because I think that's a word that gets thrown out of context, just like commitment. There's this idea, just like commitment, that you sacrifice just for the sake of sacrifice. That is incorrect, because even if you look at Jesus, he didn't sacrifice solely for other people.
Sacrifice.
Yeah, like you said, for the joy set before him. Like there was an incentive in his sacrifice. So sacrifice is always for a later thing. You sacrifice now, like your friend. He's working at a job that he don't want to now because he knows the reward is he has to keep his body alive on this earth in order to get to that, job that he's going to love. The one analogy I've been telling people is like, you think about a spouse that comes home from working hard and says, you know what, I only have from 6 to 7:30 each night to spend with you, darling. And then I got to go to sleep and go back to work. I know that's when your favorite show comes on, but you please just spend that time. It's not just for the show. Show me that you want to give up your favorite show and that it's like, no, he wants to spend time or she wants to spend time with the other one. So they do it for the sake of love. So sacrifice has to always be connected with love.
And you got TiVo anyway, so.
Yeah, exactly.
Watch it on Hulu the next day.
Seriously.
This guy told me about, he said, I think it was in Russia. He said there was like, they had this task that they make people do. And the task is basically to move rocks from one side of a place to the other. It's a meaningless task. And it's like, that's the problem when you only have sacrifice and you only have commitment. Like, there's no meaning connected to it. Like, what am I sacrificing for? What am I committing to? It has to have a greater meaning. So, and if you guys read the part where Pink was talking about Viktor Frankl, who wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. So he was saying, he found himself this guy was in a concentration camp, and he had, the manuscript of his book was taken when he was arrested. So he found little scraps of paper and was able to keep it going. He said he found that a person could find bliss in knowing that they could contemplate their beloved. Just having the idea that my wife or my children or something that I'm passionate about is still able to be attained can keep you going even in a concentration camp. It makes me think about, I wonder if even writing that book kept him going. Like knowing that, I got to get this book written and get it out to the world. It wasn't even a person.
No, he's got that quintessential line in that entire book that goes, man should never ask what is the meaning of life. Rather, man should recognize that it is he whom the question is asked. Because what is your meaning will always be individual, and it's up to you. I think a lot of people have never stopped and asked themselves the question. That's why very often you get into this boredom, this situation. And boredom is not having nothing to do. Boredom is to lose the capacity to give significance to what you do. And it is with that meaning that you can justify going through a difficulty. If you don't have a meaning or a purpose, then you can't turn sacrifice into investment. It can only be torment. Anyway.
Or it's like, the idea when Jesus says, lose your life and you shall find it. He's not just saying just arbitrarily, lose your life. And then, in the statement there, he's like, lose your life so you can get something greater after that. Everything is always about something greater later. You sacrifice now, and you always at the end of the road, you're seeing the bigger benefit. There's never just arbitrary sacrifice. I did that one poem, The Actor Doctor, and I said, it's based off the Different World episode. Actor boyfriend, doctor girlfriend, she says, I'm saving lives. He's like, what are you saving lives for? It's like, great, you're keeping people alive, but once they're alive, what are they going to do? They're looking for something purposeful, meaningful, something to commit their lives to that's, exciting. Another quote from Viktor Frankl, he said, people have enough to live, but they have nothing to live for. They have the means, but they have no meaning. So continue on the word sacrifice. Sacrifice, the word is misunderstood. We already kind of talked about this a little bit. But in this book, Mind of the Maker by Dorothy Sayers, she's saying, there's this idea that to do something that is not agreeable to your will is it's right then. That's she said it's like the Puritan value or something like that. And the idea of, she said, the idea of like, he stayed up all night to work on that painting, but he enjoyed it, so it's obviously not a sacrifice. Because it was fun, it's obviously not a sacrifice. Like, no, you are sacrificing sleep. Just because you're also doing something that you're enjoying while doing it doesn't mean it's not a sacrifice. So somehow, when it's against your nature, it's more noble.
When it's hard, it's more noble.
Yeah. Like I said, it's this kind of terminology like, we don't like to do it, but we do it. And like people find this great nobility in it. And she was saying, if you think about it, that sort of attitude is actually not sacrificial, because you're like, look how much I've sacrificed for this company and for my children. I've just given so much. It's like, it's really about you. It's not about sacrifice or the other people. It's really about what you've done. So it's a pride, a nobility.
There's this great line in Camus' The Fall, where he says, people climb up on crosses so that more people can see them and from greater distances. That's Camus.
That's great.
That's really good. And Dorothy Sayers also has a part of the end when she talks about we need to move our focus from the money to the work itself. Where it's not where we raise someone up, we say, because they have lots of money, but it's the work that we value, that they do. We say, wow, you do this, that's why you're valuable, not because that means, you're a millionaire. That's another part that's really good. But that Camus card is really good. The Fall, excellent.
Something I skipped over, but we were talking about, Jesus didn't sacrifice solely for us. Like, he did it for himself as well. That makes me think about what we were saying earlier about, like, the part and the whole, like, the artist and the audience. Like, how can you do something that's for other people and yourself? I mean, if you think about it, he could have done a sacrifice that was completely selfish. He could have been like, my law was broken, and I need to have that wrath satisfied. So the justice part, I complete that. But as far as loving the rest of y'all, not going to do it. You're doomed. Like, he could have just taken care of himself and his own anger, but he chose to love and sacrifice. So this idea that sacrifice is only about other people is not true. Like, you have to first have a self to sacrifice self. Like, people just have this idea, like, there's this sort of ambiguous, abstract notion of selflessness. It's like, no. In order for you to get on the cross, you have to first be a I human being, as Dan says. You have to first have the I before you can kill the I. Yeah, just like he was saying about Henry Ford in Whole New Mind, people feel guilty at work because if they're smiling, you must not be doing work because it's obviously looks like it's too easy. So yeah, Henry Ford firing people because they're smiling and enjoying work. It makes sense. I mean, as long as the person is working, what does it matter? Oh, you're bringing down morale. You're making people joyous around here.
Fordlandia.
And Sayers, she says, when something is a labor of love, the pain and the discomforts actually disguise themselves as enjoyment. So like the artist staying up all night to work on the painting, they don't draw attention to themselves like, oh, I was up last night. Oh, I'm just such a committed artist to my craft. They just don't even think about that. They're reveling in the fun that they had, even though there was pain and discomfort and staying up late. I just bring that again. Jesus, the joy set before him. Without that joy set before him, he couldn't have made the sacrifice. If he was just sacrificing arbitrarily, like why? If he looked ahead of him and all he saw was hopelessness and meaningless, like why would he die on the cross? If it was just as I'm going to sacrifice myself, it's like no, there was joy, there was an incentive, there was pleasure, there was something ahead of him that was of interest and want. Latin word for passion. It's interesting that we use the word passion, like, oh, I'm so passionate. It's like a positive connotation, but the word actually means suffering.
Oh, I was wondering why they call it the Passion of the Christ.
Yeah.
I'm like, that doesn't make sense, but a lot of this doesn't, so I'm just going to go with it.
And the last thing on sacrifice is this is why you also have to, you see how this mentality destroys other parts of life. So this commitment-only mentality. Like every time I see on TV or movies, they always have the scene where the guy's at work and his wife calls like, are you coming for dinner? Look, woman, I got to do this work so we can have this house and home and a place to live. I'm doing this for us. Don't call me. And it's this idea that you can like explode at your wife because I'm committed. I'm committed to my job. I'm committed to doing the right things. Like she also needs you to spend time with her. You can't just, as we've been talking about, compartmentalize stuff like, oh yeah. I think, kind of related to this chart we had from last time, since the physical is what we value the most, it's what we're most in tune with, when you take care of those needs, it's like, oh, I've taken care of my commitments. It's like, no, your wife also has a spiritual side and an emotional. Like, you have to spend time with her. You have to do things that are immaterially meaningful to her. You can't just say, I'm committed to work, so therefore I don't have to talk to you. But people have that nobility of like, I sacrifice for my kids and my family and my wife. So that's why sacrifice has to be understood, redefined. I skipped over these by accident, but these relate to play. Just continuing on with our theme, we don't stop playing, we just change the way we play. So now when you're a little kid, mom brings you a bottle. Time for your bottle, you're relaxed, you're chill in the crib. You got little, what do they call those things? I forgot what they're called.
Mobiles.
Mobile over you.
Helicopters.
What happens when you grow up? You're still chilling. Somebody's bringing you a drink on your little cool umbrella. You don't stop playing. Your playing just kind of grows up with you. You're still doing stuff. It's just in a different form. And I think in another sense, that childlike part of us is still there. So you got mom here with baby. Baby's trying to take first steps from the couch. That's it. Come to mommy. You can do it. And then what do we have over here?
Bernard speaking.
Exactly. Yeah. You guys can do it. I believe in everyone. Like, there's that part of you that still needs to be encouraged. Even when you grow up, you still need to feel that sense of you can do it. Somebody's behind you. I'm thinking about you. I care about you.
Possibility
Conference 2011. Motivational speakers are Kim Possible and John B. Leaf. Register now.
I like that.
John B. Leaf.
That is hot.
So there's a part, going back to the very first chart, we will always be this. Part child, part adult. You don't lose the sense of wanting to be encouraged. You don't lose the sense of playfulness. It just changes. Kind of on a I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. Kind of on a negative flip side. Last time we were talking about negative flip side. On the flip side, last week we were talking about living in the moment. And so I think even the idea of growing up, it can be intersect that idea. So you got a little kid playing with a toy car, but then all he's dreaming about is growing up to drive the car. Oh, they grow up so fast. Little girls playing with makeup and a mirror and dolls, and she can't wait to put on makeup. That's like, for whatever reason, since even when we're little kids, we have this inability to stand still. Like you want to grow up when you're a kid, and when you are an adult, you want to be a kid again.
Right.
So we've been talking about male and female. So this thing is what I call the creative family. So in each of us, we have the masculine we've been talking about, and the feminine. And so speaking of play, I think we also have inside of us an inner child. You always hear people talking about the inner child. So it's like the mom and dad kind of, come together and they birth your inner child. So we all have the masculine, feminine, and then the child part of us.
I heard, it's kind of my theory, or I don't know where you got the Trinity there, really. Female's the Holy Spirit, huh? And the child is Jesus. Yeah, I don't know. That's
good, yeah. That's interesting.
I don't know those qualities.
Well, this dichotomy, this split where the child is considered less human than an adult.
Yeah.
It used to be, you'd look at medieval stained glass windows and writings of like Aquinas or Aristotle, they referred to children as little people. They weren't, there was just that little person. It made no sense to say that kid is less human than an adult because there's only particulars, Bernard, Daniel, and you can't really make these hierarchies of saying a child is less human. They're just their own little person. That's how they used to be depicted in classical art. You can say it.
Mm-hmm. The child is the little adult.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a more recent, I don't know how many years ago, more recent sort of change where we've made them less human than a little adult.
Yeah, like I said, I think
Kant.
It's always, but yeah, I think if you attack that childlike sensibility, like I said, once you can attack faith, that's your main connection to God, because that's all He cares about is how do you use faith. Nothing else matters. Without faith, it's impossible to please. So if you can attack the childlikeness and have people thinking that the idea of being a child is stupid, that faith and playfulness is stupid, then you'll stop doing that, and then you'll become that adult who shuts everything out. It's like, I know everything. Don't try to tell me about God. Don't try to tell me about faith. And then you won't get help, and then you won't get the blessings because you have no connection, because you're just adultness and Mr. Know-It-All all the time. So the creative family has been divorced or separated. So this is one of the best things. I came up with this. I was men overboard, women and children first. So the masculine side of us is always at work. Work, serious, even though you got a Serenity, poster on your office.
It should be a demotivation.
Yeah, exactly. We should make those and sell them. People will be like, oh yeah, that's how I feel. Drudgery.
Oh, they have a website.
Oh my gosh, they're amazing.
They look serious, but they're really demotivated.
Yeah.
They look good, but when you
It's
look
hilarious.
at that, it's hilarious.
It's like, oh, it's true. That says a lot.
Have TV.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
We'll look at them later.
We gotta look
Sorry,
at them.
we digress.
But yeah, so I feel like the masculine part of us inside, we divided from our childlikeness and our feminine side. We're all like, man or woman, we're always taught serious, work, and you're not allowed to bring these two together. Keep this stuff apart. Keep this thing over here. And so, the female mom says, I just want us to be all together, integrated, one happy, creative family. And our child says, when is dad coming home? He never takes a break anymore, and he never spends time with us. He's at work. He's all work and no play. When is he going to take care of us and take care of himself? And I remember I worked with the woman who was Australian. She's like, yeah, America, you guys only take 2 weeks for vacation out of the year. She's like, everywhere else is like 4, 6 weeks. I was like, really?
You start with a month vacation in most of Europe. Like, that's just standard.
They don't. This is why they get to travel. Where are you going in 2 weeks? Yeah. Half of which you have to spend
with your family at Christmas.
Yeah.
I'm not bitter.
In the back.
In this praise of slowness, he talks about that too. Like, Americans have this what they call vacation-itis. Like, they don't even take their vacation or their sick days or their personal days or anything.
People start losing vacation time because they've never even taken it. Like my father-in-law. Like,
hours actually.
What are you doing? You've done it? Why?
Because it's this sense of seriousness and nobility. We have to be working. We have to constantly be working. No time for play.
Well, I mean, economic pressures are in on it as well. And without shooting off into a lecture on economics, ironically, this dichotomy between work and play is actually what has led to, in so much of the price of what's the standard of living going down. Actually, it's a self-feeding cycle. And that's what makes it so horrendous. Actually, the more this goes unchecked, the more and more it becomes unsustainable. Inflation kicks in and things like that.
Which is proof that the devil doesn't want us to play.
And it's proof that Kant is awful.
Kant.
So yeah, I just really like this picture because I think all human beings. Like we've been talking those other pictures, pumping up the left brain and pumping up the I think we're just all taught to focus on that masculine side of us that's sort of proactive and goes out and works and is always doing something. And we very rarely take care of the feminine side of us, which wants to rest and relax and take care of self and have, time for self, or take care of child who just wants to do silly, goofy things at times. Like, we're always isolating these from this. And like he said, in the video, the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. So this guy, if all he's thinking about is work, is depressed. And the other parts, and you get frustrated because, like, when you're going to let us out? Like, we got needs too. Like, you can't just work, you got to relax too.
I think it's so much a part of Americanism because in other places, people just enjoy, especially in Australia, like you said, they just know how to have. Every Australian I've ever met has been like the funnest person. They go off. They encourage you not to go straight to college in Euro to take a year off, figure it out. They're just not in this incredible rush to do what? I don't know. I guess it's this rush to despair. I'm not sure, but I feel like we're in such a rush to like
going nowhere fast.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you could take the Americanism and merge it with an entrepreneurship, it's an unstoppable force. In today's economic model, so much of it consists of jobs that don't create products, that make money off of money, that result in the loss of the value of the dollar, or service industries where the product that is created is not your own, it's from another person, and that becomes self-feeding. I shot a little bit off on that econ lecture.
Yeah, I've had this comic up for a while now,
Get the rest of it
but it's pretty much
a lot of lectures in there.
just this guy in a therapist's office, and he's sitting in a chair that's too big for him, has a ball, and the therapist asks, can you get in touch with your inner child now? So I think people have that mentality that everything about being a child is always something ridiculous and over the top.
Right.
Well, Jesus said we should become like children.
Yeah, such as like Kingdom of Heaven, Faces, Angels, something like that. I can't remember the verse. Something about the angels, like their countenance is like. There's some verse he says like the angels' countenance reflects is such like children in heaven.
No, really?
I've never heard that.
No, wow.
Who just made that up?
Just
Get
making
out
stuff
of
up.
here.
Kant's fault. Kant's making your memory
That's
bad.
not biblical.
I think that was in Mormon Bible.
It might be in
I have to go look, but I thought it was saying something. Yeah, I swear there's something in there like that.
I'm pretty sure Jesus never said
Maybe it's in Revelations. Nobody reads that.
Nobody reads that.
It's in Psalm.
I'm telling you.
I'm gonna look it up later.
Yeah.
All right, people listening.
Read book in the Bible. Come on.
People listening, don't take that as a verse.
Sounded great.
All right, so now
I've read it.
It's probably right. It's in the book of Hesitations.
It's right before Genesis.
all right. So now we're going to talk about the continued notion that play should make you feel guilty, and we're going to look from two 2 or 3 viewpoints. First being morality and humanity, and then what I call cynicism and Christianity. So first, we got to start out with the idea of light and hope versus dark and despair, and then in the middle is reality and truth. So the bottom line is we live in a world that is both light and dark, has some hope, has some despair. And regardless of if it's a pretty picture, that is the truth. The problem is, using our yin-yang symboling, and people try to put this split between the two of them. They only look at either the light or either the dark. They separate the two. So I think the one reason people feel guilty about play is because, you've already been taught, seriousness is what life is all about. And then you have all of this talk about responsibility, and there's pain in the world, there's suffering, there's hunger, there's humanitarian needs that need to be taken care of, and there's death. So people feel guilty about playing in the midst of that. It's like, how can I be playful and fun when there's all this serious stuff going on around me? And I think you think of Holocaust, you think of 9/11, you feel like you're being disrespectful to people, like it's such a cruel thing to do. Like, oh, people are suffering, but look, we're making art, we're painting, we're having it's like having a dance party in the middle of the Holocaust or something like that. So Jon Stewart, comedian, he said something that I thought was interesting. I was watching the Biography channel, and they were talking about 9/11 and how all of the late night shows kind of went off the air, and everybody was like, when is it okay to be funny again? When is it okay to come back to the air? So Letterman was the first to come back, and Jon Stewart was just like, I don't see what the big deal was. He's like, I bet you in the concentration camps, people were cracking jokes. He said, I think it's just human nature to find the light in the darkness.
Isn't that what that movie's about?
Which one?
Yes.
Everything is beautiful. Everything is beautiful.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah, but it's about a concentration camp.
Yeah.
Life is beautiful.
Yeah.
Life is beautiful.
That's great.
A dad who basically he sets up like games with his child.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Powerful movie.
It's
Very
Very good.
It's
movie.
about exactly.
It's online, but it's very good.
And it's sad,
No, it's sad. Definitely. The end.
but
it's showing.
there's so much
the
beauty
need for
in the
that.
midst of it. Yeah.
Right.
But, that's what Viktor Frankl said. You got to find that.
I forgot to write. It was funny when I was doing this. I saw a quote by somebody posted by Anne Frank. She said something like, "I don't remember the darkness. I just remember the beauty," or something like that. And I was like, "Oh, perfect for this." And she's from the Holocaust, or during that period.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like Viktor Frankl was saying, even if it's not jokes and laughter, like he had that book to help. To him, that was play. To have that book to work on, it kept him holding on to the end, to be able to get out of there.
And those are the people that stayed alive.
Yeah.
Like if they didn't have any hope or thought their family were dead, they
Yeah.
just died.
Yeah, right.
And play again. He talks about these firefighters who all day long on the back of the truck, they're just joking on each other constantly, making fun. He's like, why? He's like, well, if you see fire, death all day long, and that's all you continue to talk about, you would depress yourself. So they have to do something else to give themselves a break from that.
The funniest people I ever met in my life are with these. My girlfriend was dating a mortician.
That's hilarious.
Excellent.
And they were just like
Wow.
very
Wow,
funny
they're
people.
human
And
too,
I had to change my thinking.
I never thought of that. That's a really good point. I mean, if all that's coming across if that's your job is dead people every day, I can imagine you're pretty depressed.
Dead people and sad people.
Yeah. Wow.
Sad families. And,
Funniest writers.
So I'm going to say that while some people are saying we should be not playful, I'm saying it's time to turn the play up even more. And here's why. Okay, so let's say, so all you guys are in here, some of y'all got cups, right? This is
No.
perfect. I didn't even plan
Glass.
this. So you guys got cups, and I got this pitcher of water. It's filled up, and I got 18 pitchers of water behind me. And you guys got empty cups, and you're dying of thirst. And I'm just pouring over water to the point that it's overflowing, spilling it on the ground like, oh, this water's so great. It's amazing. And you guys are sitting there, and you're like, hey, Bernard. And I'm like, hey, what's up, guys? This water is so, ooh, it's good water. So then I'm like, wait, oh, I'm sorry, guys. I shouldn't be drinking water in front of you. let me go hide and drink this water. But no, okay, so I shouldn't be drinking water in front of you guys. You know what? I feel so guilty. Let me just pour this water out. How many of you guys are going to be like, oh yeah, solidarity? You be like, idiot, pour some water into our cup. We're thirsty. So that's the way I see play. Like, just because there's people around us who don't have play, and we're having play and we have abundance, we shouldn't feel guilty for it. We should continue to pour it out until it spills over, until it gets in them, and then they overflow. Like, if we pour out the water, nobody gets water. So if we stop playing, everybody will be depressed. So even though it may feel kind of like, okay, stuff is serious, should we play? And once again, it comes down to like the right moment. Like, I'm not going to be at a funeral, be like, hey guys, I'm going to do a hip hop freestyle right now about why your grandmother died, you know? I mean, obviously there's places for it, but just as an overall general way of life, the idea of stopping play is ridiculous, because then the world will be cut off from the source and the world will become depressed.
Mighty good thing you did with the water. That's good. You should have analogy. That's the word.
Illustration.
Why didn't you just say stuff?
Stop.
Interesting stuff you did.
No, you should open poetry presentations.
That thing was something.
Yeah, that thing. I'm serious. You should open
we
poetry
can.
presentations with that, and then like, and here's the water. Bam.
And then pour it on everybody.
Pour the hose.
Potato Head got a nose ring? Wow.
I did that.
Progressive potato head.
I was about to say
So, Christians and artists, and then mostly Christians who are also artists,
They're a Christian artist.
Don't pay attention.
they're probably the ones who are ridiculed the most, because they're the ones being the most playful. And especially if you're a Christian artist, you have a second layer, which we'll kind of get into in a minute. So yeah, Jesus said, be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. I think it's interesting. He says, be of good cheer. Like, he's like, I already took care of this stuff. You guys are now focusing on this darkness. I already took care of it. Back to Eden. Like, that was the whole point.
Right.
I came to redeem. Be of good cheer. Stop looking at the darkness.
See, it's funny because a lot of Christian artists I know who do like church related art are so like take themselves so seriously. And they don't really play it what they do. It's like, this is worship music, guys. We need to like be like, man, no, have fun, goof off, play around, And when I see people like taking themselves seriously because what they're doing, just because what you're doing carries weight, doesn't mean you have to do it seriously.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then my question is, if people have this mentality that like, we shouldn't be playing, we just have to really focus on the pain and the suffering. It's like, what as an artist or a Christian, how does that make you look any different than everybody else? If you're just commenting on what already exists, that is darkness, that's pain. Like, how does that make you any different? So I think the goal of artists, and especially a Christian artist, is to go back to this idea of the what if, the what is, and the what if. So yeah, in truth, you have to see that there's a whole picture. There's light and dark, and they somehow, integrate somewhere, overlap, I should say. So you have to look at the darkness and say, okay, that's what is. However, I'm not going to remain looking at the darkness. I now ask, what if? Like, what will I do with that darkness? It's like when I said, God doesn't look out and say, oh, that's dark. He doesn't just look out and make a commentary. He looks out, sees what is, and then says what he wants. So as artists, we look at the evils of the world, and we don't just accept it. We kind of let it come in, we filter it, we process it, and then we put it back out. And so the thing we get into here is, I think it's interesting. Like, there's kind of two camps of people. You have people over here, which usually are Christians, in the light. And then you have people over here who have this dark. So the problem with the Christians who do art is it doesn't look at the whole picture. It's just like, Jesus. That's it. It's like just Jesus and rainbows and flowers. But for the people who don't know that, it's very cruel because you're not using empathy and you're not recognizing their suffering. Like, they don't have Jesus yet. And just to be like Jesus, they're like, well, I don't see that. Like, where is that? But then on the other side, the darkness people, they're just like, yeah, life is dark and suffering and pain and hungry. What are you going to do about it? It's like, well, light also has hope. I mean, life also has hope. Like, people, they like to paint that picture, though, that life is just dark and, despair. It's like, you can't just have one or the other. It's both. So I think Christians get into a lot of trouble because they don't really relate to people because they're only seeing one half of the lens. It's just, oh, it's Jesus and light. It's like, yeah, some people haven't found it yet. But then people on the other end of the spectrum, like, they're not being truthful either because they're trying to paint life as if it's all hopeless. And that's very depressing and cruel to people who actually want hope.
Well, I mean, the only Christian writers who are really considered Dostoevsky, Walker Percy, Flannery O'Connor. Flannery O'Connor had lupus, died at like 42. Walker Percy's whole family, both of his parents committed suicide, and he wrestled with suicide his entire life. He said he was trying to be a Quentin Compson who didn't commit suicide, from Faulkner's Flannery. And Dostoevsky, his first wife committed suicide. He was thrown in prison for the Soviet Revolution for a very long time. He gambled all of his money away, and then his next wife died. His entire life was absolutely miserable, and Dostoevsky is responsible for, I think, the greatest novel ever written. The Brothers Karamazov and the Archbishop of Canterbury and everyone just absolutely loves Dostoevsky because, and likewise these three artists, because they didn't make this separation as Christian artists between the light and darkness. They actually took it and made something beautiful. They didn't. They integrated it.
Yeah.
I like to say. It was very important.
So something Laura Jean said once. It was me and this band I played in, and we were all at this photograph festival, and they projected these photographs on the pavilion on this huge projector. So at the end of it, she's like, yeah, I saw there was a lot of pictures of suffering and people and death, and I know these things are real, and we should show them and not shy away and not pretend they don't exist. But she was like, I want to see pictures of people in happy states and emotions. And then she was like, the reason I think we don't see that is because it's usually marketed to us. It's never just people being happy. It's always brochure, Funland, everybody at this college gets along even though we're different races. It's always sold. It's never authentic. And so I think that's interesting because every time you go to when you go to a photograph festival or a documentary, it's always the gut-wrenching topics. This is real. This is real. It's why is it that we associate what's dark as the truest reality? And I think part of it is just the fall. We're already in tune with the darkness. Even though we want world peace, we like controversy. We like to see Jerry Springer. Oh, the guy got punched in the face. Even though we don't want to see it, we really do. There's something in our nature that likes discord and fighting. It's already naturally attuned with that, even though we're hoping for this. So I think that's part of it.
It makes me think of Shanna's song.
Which one?
The No Pants song.
Yeah.
People love that song because there's not one serious thing about it.
Yeah.
It's just about being a kid and playing. With no pants on.
Yeah, I love that song. I thought about if I didn't know if she was coming. I wanted her to play that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes me think of hip-hop albums. Every time there's always these artists and they're like, yeah, man, don't talk to me. Ask me why I'm talking about what I'm talking about. You need to go to the streets. I'm only reflecting what I see. And it's truth. Truth, there is that. There is darkness.
I know, right?
Yeah, some of them fake.
Got a college degree.
But it's there comes a point where it's okay, you're on your 7th album now.
Right.
When are you going to start saying yeah, I see this. However, here's the hope too. They're always, but people want to be sold. They know people want to be sold that controversy, so they put it out. Because it's like if you have a mirror and you go into a dark room, you're only going to reflect darkness. You have to go into a light room where you can actually get some light. So if you're always in that environment, that's all you're going to see, and that's all you're going to put out. So you have to put yourself in hopeful environments. You can't just keep putting out albums yeah, this is real. It's yeah, it's real, but this is real too. There's hope. All right. Moving along, I'll get back to some of these other quotes.
Well, that does that thing to Christians where if I'm not on the streets, therefore I'm not authentic.
Yeah, exactly.
People do that. But, that's not how you should look at it. Esther is told when she sees the queen with Xerxes, so you were put in this place, perhaps maybe you were put in this place for a time such as this. Whatever role we're in, whether it's middle class, upper class, lower class, whatever, there's a specific thing you do. If you're always going, I'm not on the street, therefore I can't live for Christ, well then you're never going to live for Christ.
Yeah, and I think that's good, especially like in the black community. Like, yeah, if you're not, oh, you don't sell drugs, you don't shoot guns, you can't be hip hop. Like, why not? I make hip hop music. No, that's not real.
Right.
It's like,
So what's
how real do I have to be? I have to get shot?
Right.
Like, why do I have to get shot to make an album? Why can't I just make a hip hop album that has nothing to do with being shot?
Right.
5 shots couldn't draw me. Or the 2 bucks.
Do it with artists too. You're not
Yeah.
starving. You're not an artist.
Yeah.
So society's going to help you starve.
Yeah, unless if you're not starving, you're selling out.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So this book I'm going to talk about in a minute, Desiring God, he said something interesting. He said, God has 2 lenses in which he looks at life. And I thought it was fascinating. I was like, oh, it's just like his left brain and his right brain. So, God can look down at the present and he can see, the sin condition, the problems. But ultimately, he has his right brain, which sees the big picture, the redemption. So he's seeing both at the same time. He's looking and he's seeing the problems, but it's not phasing him because he's already seen the end of the picture. So I just thought it was really fascinating if you think about God as left brain and right brain.
The brain.
So we're coming to the end.
Basically, the hideous strength.
So the last few reasons why I think people still feel guilty about play. The first is I was having this conversation with Daniel and tied into another conversation with a friend, and he was saying whenever people think about play, for whatever reason, they think of debauchery for some reason. Like if you say play, it all of a sudden translates to something immoral. And I never really considered that, and I was like, okay. I didn't get it, but then I thought about another conversation I had with my friend in my drama group. She's like, we were doing this presentation, and I was like, this guy who was our client was not letting us do the script. He was like really tightly controlling. I was like, just let us be us. She's like, Bernard, you have 2 things going on for you that you don't understand. Other people, see differently than you. She's like, you have like this deep creativity and this sort of deep values in what you believe. So you kind of just, censor yourself. You rightly know what to say and not what to say. Like, they don't have to worry about you. I was like, yeah, that's true. I never thought about that. She's like, but other people, when they hear creativity and play, they get afraid that somebody's going to say something weird or strange. I was like, really? So for whatever reason, people, once they hear play or fun, they automatically think, oh, this is going to be silly and strange and weird. Oh, we got to shut this down. This is weird. So that's the whole idea of sort of this immoral guilt. So here on...
I was just going to say, it's like John Piper's Desiring God, and how he had to reclaim hedonism. Oh, is that on there?
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about that. So, plethora of pleasure and play, that's what we need. That's where we're going. So, speaking to this idea of immorality. So, you say you got this guy right here, or this is all of us. We all have this sort of spidey sense of play that's always going off in us because we're designed in the image of God. And so it's always going off. We're always going to be looking for it.
The operants are here.
So, over on this side...
I'll be right back.
All right, you'll be right back. So let's start on this side. So what happens is, when temptations come, they give this facade of fun and playfulness. So automatically, that thing inside us is like, ooh, that's what I want, because we found a match. But what happens is when you portray God as not playful and negative, your inside sort of sense is like, oh, there's no fun over here, then why am I coming over here? You have this natural inclination that God has given you, and if it's not being fulfilled, you're going to go where it's fulfilled. So it's all about fulfilling your desires, but in the right context. So you hear people saying all the time, like, people from the outside looking in, how come they get to have all the fun? Like, a lot of Christians always looking, oh, they're having all the fun. Because to them, they see this as fun. They don't see God and church as fun, because the church, in a lot of ways, has portrayed God as boring.
Or church people are boring.
Yeah, or that, or they just are boring. And then, people ask themselves questions like, why would I want to deny myself pleasure? Why would I come over here to God? And then you get over here, it's like, yeah, we don't do this, we don't do that. That's out of the question. It's all about don't, what we're not doing, what we're refraining from. It's like you have this inclination that's always trying to do something, and you're being told the opposite. Why are you ever going to come over here? So the reason I think this problem happens is because it's how we see God. So first is we see God as boring, and the way we see God is what we reflect on each other. So if you see this guy hating work, you're imagining God as hating work. Or if you see another person as boring, this person is projecting an image of boredom, you're going to project that onto God because we're made in His image. So I think that's the first reason. You can read that. You may not have been here for that one. The second one is, I think the bad teaching, like people read the Old Testament and God is always about wrath, fire, destruction,
Not really a fun guy.
Yeah, He's not fun. Like, exactly. Mm-hmm. And my friend had a good point. He said, there's a difference between who God is and what He has to do. So he said, think of a cop. A cop is out on the street enforcing justice, making sure laws aren't broken. When he gets home, his little kid runs, "Daddy!" and he sits down and colors with him and watches. Like, that cop has to do what he has to do on the street, but that's not who he is. So I think you look at the Old Testament,
interesting.
God is not doing stuff because that's His nature. Like, He was just trying to.
Well, that's not the totality of His nature.
Yeah, and even then, even that was out of love. Like, He was trying to get stuff in correction. He wasn't just destroying people because he was bored. That's what we think. God is bored, so He must be destroying stuff.
I like to think about how Jesus healed that one dude's eyes with His spit.
Yeah.
Blood.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that's like, I don't know. I feel like in a lot of His miracles and like Pentecost, like, talk about getting us out of our box and being like, no, it's gonna be fun and weird.
Yeah.
And exciting. Yeah.
I just listened to this thing last night. It's incredible. I'm going to send it out. It's called like The Emotions of God, and it just talks about how God is this perfect personality and how He's humorous. He's like, every time I see comedians, I'm like, how can this person be made in the image of God? And we look at a comedian, and then I say, well, God made this person. Obviously, God is cracking jokes all the time. Every time I look at comedians, I'm like, okay, God is funny. He must be funny. Why would He make a person who has a sense of humor? It doesn't make sense.
Or a sloth.
Or what?
Well,
A sloth.
Well, I think that we think God is funny, but the joke's on us. That's the way I see God is funny.
See, we're laughing right
You got
now.
a sense of humor, but the joke's on you.
See, even just like we're always trying to make each other laugh and always trying to make it, like we're all, even if you're not a funny person, when you show up to a party, like you're trying to find something. Oh, your shirt, ha. Like, even if you're not, a comedian, you're always trying to do something to make other people laugh. We just have this innate desire to want to laugh and to be made to laugh. I think another, like we talked about this before, we only see God through our left brains. So like you're saying, we see Him as very serious. And especially if you're seeing Him through this sort of wrath, anger, ruler, destroyer, hell, fire, and brimstone. Yeah, that person is not fun at all. You don't want to be around that guy. So if that's the picture we have of God, obviously we're never going to see Him as playful and light and fun. I think, was it Zephaniah? I think it's the last... I want to say the last book of the Old Testament, but it could be wrong. Something that talks about when God...
Zechariah.
It's
Micah?
Haggai.
Is it Malachi?
Malachi. I think it's in Zephaniah, though. It talks about when we worship God, like He zealously, like He sings over us. Like the idea of God singing. People would never think of that, Him being exuberant.
Like the banner, the name Joe and these things. The banner.
No, it was just saying it's something about like something like when we worship, or it just said God sings over us.
Oh.
I think it's Zephaniah. I could be wrong.
There's also He will rejoice over your love.
Yeah, we got the. So I think another reason it's hard to see God as playful, because if you go back to that, the childish. If we see God as this, it's kind of goofy. It's like, oh, God, what if He wakes up and accidentally kicks over planet Earth? Like, we don't like to think of Him as a child because we're like, oh, it's kind of scary because, people who do childish things do stupid things. But I think it goes back to the childlike. God is humble. He's unassuming. He's willing to listen. Even though He knows everything, He's willing to listen. He has that perfect blend of adult and child. He knows everything, but He's willing to listen to you. So we gotta balance seriousness, and play, as we've said before. So that's this. But then if you look at Genesis, what are the first two things that God says to do? Something very serious. Take dominion over the earth. Next thing, be fruitful and multiply, have sex. I mean, people always, me and Daniel were talking about this. He's like, how do people say God is telling people not to do stuff when the first thing he says is rule the world, have sex, and eat? Like, that was the commandments of Genesis. So you're telling me God is not about fun and pleasure? No, he's the one who said this stuff. I didn't say any stuff. He's the one who wrote it. So in his context, in his order, in the right, way of doing it, he is the one who's saying, be serious, have fun, balance it out. Another thing is, like, I remember when I was in Sunday school, bored out of my mind as a little kid, and they would say stuff like, every day in heaven's gonna be like Sunday. And I was just like, are you kidding me? I'm going to this for eternity. I was like, peace. I was like, that's the picture people are getting portrayed to them, that you're going to be in hot suits and singing songs and swaying. And
hot suits.
I mean, serious. Like, if that's the image of heaven, I don't want to be there for eternity because I was bored. So church needs to be changed because I don't blame people for not wanting to come to church. They're bored. They bored all week. Like this one chart we had. They're bored all week. Only start having fun here, and then you're telling me I got to do another obligation thing, which is boring, where you're telling me I'm a horrible person and I'm going to hell. I was just sleeping in too. Another thing, you always hear God talking about how, he's making things brand new. I always think that's interesting because it's almost like he's trying to show you, like, I do stuff new all the time. Like, I'm always renewing. I'm never old. Check out this. This is fresh. My mercies are new. Everything is always fresh. It makes me think, hip-hop, they have a term, staying fresh. Like, you can't have last year's sneakers or last year's clothes. Like, you always got to be up to date. Yeah. And I think he has that sense about him. He's always, keeping things up to date. So the final things we will end on. So after that conversation me and Daniel had, he said this statement, play is the key to morality. And I think it goes back to, back to this chart. If you're already doing this and doing this during the week, like, you're not going to be tempted by this. If this play is fulfilled and satisfied in the right way, you're not going to go towards temptation. The emotions thing I was listening to last night, the guy was saying, like, the reason, he's like, when we're fascinated by the beauty of God, everything else fades away. Like, if God is the thing that fascinates you, you won't go towards temptation. So indulging in beauty and creative things and finding that marvel and mystery and magic, they will keep you from wanting to do these things.
I'm sorry. We're not interrupting. We're not interrupting.
I'm sorry.
So think about when people get bored, they start thinking of stuff to do. And if they don't fulfill it the right way, they're going to start doing dumb stuff. There's in play, he talks about the Texas Tower Massacre. This guy got up in a tower in college and just killed people. He said his whole life his mom made him play, dad made him play the piano, mom never let him do anything. So he never had any creative outlet. But he would keep these diaries of how he wanted to kill people. So he was being creative, just in a negative way. So when people can't get out their stuff in the right way, it comes out weirdly. Idle hands are the devil's workshop. If you're told God is boring here, then you're like, well, why do I want to go to boredom? I'm going to come over here where it looks fun. So temptation is not the problem. The problem is not being filled up and fulfilled with something exciting. I think if I had that one chart.
It's so insane. I want to see.
So remember I was talking about the guy with his wife? The problem is not him being tempted by the neighbor. The problem is that he's bored with his wife. So if he's bored with his wife, the temptation then becomes appealing. But if he's satisfied here, even if he's tempted by that, he's going to be like, oh, that's fleeting. I got a real thing going on. It makes me think of Adam and Eve. Joseph Prince said Adam and Eve were taught to focus on what they weren't able to do versus what they were able to do. So they were kind of put in this sense of negative thinking. Like, you're always trying to not do stuff. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing it. Like, you're always going to, if you have an emptiness, you're going to want to fill. Like, creativity is about making, not the negative, not doing. So the final things we're going to talk about is, as you were referring to, the Christian hedonism.
Hey, Bernard. How much time you got left in the lecture part?
Like less than 10 minutes.
If you guys want to do it. Maybe 10 minutes.
Sorry, we'll come to another class. Can we do
This
this?
is the last one.
Oh, no, then we have
It's almost done, and then it's almost done. Then we're having performances.
I want them to hear my song. That's why they're waiting on dinner.
All right.
No, I know. No worries.
All right. So not Mike Bickle, but I will send out a link to that guy. Last thing we're talking about is pleasure, and so in this Desiring God book, he's talking about becoming what he calls Christian hedonist, basically finding the most amount of pleasure that you possibly can, but it's in the right context. So he says these are the 5 convictions of that. The longing to be happy is a universal human experience, and it is good, not sinful. We should never try to deny or resist our longing to be happy as though it were a bad impulse. Instead, we should seek to intensify this longing and nourish it with whatever will provide the deepest and most enduring satisfaction. 3, the deepest and most enduring happiness is found only in God, not from God, but in God. 4, the happiness we find in God reaches its consummation when it is shared with others in the manifold ways of love. 5, to the extent we try to abandon the pursuit of our own pleasure, we fail to honor God and love people. Or to put it positively, the pursuit of pleasure is a necessary part of all worship and virtue. That is, the chief end of man is to glorify God by enjoying Him forever. So he took this catechism that used to say the chief end is to glorify God, and he's like, so you're saying that the enjoying God is separate from the glorifying? So he's like, that's why he changed it to by. So the main thing on this is just this idea of that pleasure is a very good thing, has taken on a negative connotation because of the way people pursue it. It's not about pleasure, it's about how you pursue pleasure. This other guy, Mike Bickle, he has the 7 longings of the human heart. The longing for assurance of being enjoyed by God, the longing to be fascinated, the longing to be beautiful, the longing to be great. We long for intimacy without shame, the longing to be wholehearted and passionate, the longing for significance and to make a lasting impact. So it's like we have all of these longings. People usually try to fulfill them in other ways. They try to be fascinated in other ways. It's not about the need or the desire itself. It's about how are you fulfilling them. These quotes, C.S. Lewis, there's a kind of happiness and wonder that makes you serious. So Dan Pink was talking about, up until now, nobody's really pursued happiness with a sort of rigor. But both these people are saying, we should be violently pursuing happiness. If you think about God, if God looks at himself, he looks at himself and says, I deserve to be happy. He's violently pursuing happiness because he deserves happiness. And if we're made in his image, what does that say about us? It's just all about the context of how you pursue it. Dalai Lama said, I believe the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. That is clear. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we're all seeking something better in life. So I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness. So the final thing, I think this is the final.
It's the final chart?
I think so.
Oh goodness. This is it. I've got.
There have been hundreds of these charts.
Michelle's a question.
No, it's actually a comment.
comment.
I think that it's incredibly awesome. Sorry, I couldn't think of a better adjective. That you made the charts and these boards with posters.
We're visual learners.
Because I feel like people just started making PowerPoints and this stuff went out of the window.
Yeah,
so
and
this
it's
is
like,
great.
where is
You
this
actually have to
stuff?
think and try hard and take out time to do this. So
Use markers.
Thank you. And just thank you on your hands.
So, the final thing, kind of tie in Dan Pink's thing on meaning. I think just this talk about desire and pleasure and wanting to be happy, like all those things are tied into meaning. The sense of just feeling like you're worth something, like something matters. So our last chart I have is good or just good enough. From that Desiring God book, I think it's interesting that he said, it's not so much about pleasure. Like, he's saying, you guys think you're going after pleasure too much. He's like, really, you're not pleased enough. Mm-hmm. Like, you're too easily pleased. And so I had this other chart over here on, mediocrity. So it's kind of related.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, everybody stays here below this line because it's easy to stay below the threshold of hard work. Up here is where excellence is. You got to climb up there. So similar to our life, I found it interesting in the book, The Truth About Work, he was describing our life as mediocre. I was like, I thought about art, but he was like, no, our life is very mediocre. Mm-hmm. So, people down here, they look up at this little piece of fruit and they're like, oh yeah, that's good enough. I'll just go with that. This juicy fruit up here is too much work. This is easy because somebody is like, oh yeah, how does this taste good? Yeah, you want to try it? Yeah, oh yeah, I'll just go with that because you already pre-tested it, rather than climbing up and getting your own fruit. So this line is mediocrity, easily pleased, pleasurable for a season, low expectations, and I think the main thing is, if you're only reaching this high, you're pretty much saying, this is what I see of God. Like, this is what he's, I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. But you're pretty much saying, this is all you're going to go for, even though I made this available. Mm-hmm. So up here is life, abundant, not satisfied with good enough, deep longing and lasting satisfaction, having great expectations, the choicest fruit, versus the terminology we use, which is low-hanging fruit. Oh, just put that low-hanging fruit. People can grab that easily.
You dropped the C.S. Lewis quote that goes, the reason people fall into sin is because they're too easily pleased. Sin is a lesser pleasure. And the Piper uses that a lot in that book. It's the reason people sin is because they are too easily pleased. They want pleasure rather than joy. I think that sums it up really well. Yeah. Of course, C.S. Lewis, whenever he said something, summed it up really well.
Yeah, pretty much.
So just to wrap all this up, pleasure is a great thing. And I'm not the one who wrote this stuff. So I'm not preaching heresy if everybody wants to go back and say it. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. I didn't write that. Eve looked at the fruit and saw that it was pleasant to the eyes and good for food. God looked and saw all that he made was very good. He didn't say it was good enough. He said it was very good. And God is in heaven and he does as he pleases. So whatever brings God pleasure, he's always doing it. So to wrap up, art, creativity, life, you can have good enough, or you can have very good, excellent, beyond belief, and a lot of that requires hard work and pursuing pleasure. And I'll do my poem after Evan does his song, but I'm going to do my poem about meaning. So that is the end of the chorus.